but I don't have cloud experience. Today, I want to talk about this one sentence that I hear from people trying to become a cloud engineers all of the time. But I don't have cloud experience. What does that even mean, buddy? The frustrating part is that the sentence may actually be completely true. You may have an AWS certification, you may have worked in IT for 5, 10 years, you may have some projects sitting on GitHub, you may be doing a career switch from a non-tech background, but you've never been paid to operate AWS inside of a company. So when a job description will ask for experience, you immediately assume that you are disqualified. Now, the easiest way to explain the problem with that assumption is to actually show you two candidates who have exactly the same background. And this applies to anyone, but for this instance, we'll just use someone that's been in IT support for the last 7 years. Both of these people have the same background, like I said, both have AWS certifications, both have built some sort of identity and access project, and neither has held a paid cloud role before. Let's say they go into an interview and the interviewer asks the candidate number one, tell me about your cloud experience. And they'll say something like, I don't have any real experience yet, but I am certified, I've done some projects, and I'm a quick learner. I'm just looking for somebody to give me an opportunity. Now let's hear the second candidate. They might say something like, I haven't held a professional role yet, so I want to be really accurate and clear about that. My background is in IT support, where I've dealt with identity, access, and user impacting incidents. To build the missing AWS skills, I independently designed a non-production identity environment, provisioned the access controls through Terraform, tested which actions should be allowed and denied, and revised the offboarding design after I found that removing an assignment did not immediately invalidate an active session. I can show you the build and explain every single decision. So do you notice what changed? Candidate 2 did not invent an employer, right? They did not call a sandbox project production experience, and they did not pretend that 7 years in IT automatically made them a cloud engineer. But they also did not erase everything that they had done before and asked the interviewer to take a blind chance on them. So candidate 1 gave the employer a promise, whereas candidate 2 gave them evidence that they could question. And that is the core idea of this video. You can't manufacture professional cloud experience before your first cloud role, but you can stop treating experience as a binary condition where either you already have the title or you have absolutely nothing an employer can trust. Because the moment that I don't have experience becomes the end of your thinking, your entire career is now just waiting for a stranger to solve the problem for you. Now, by the end, you'll know exactly what each form of evidence proves and how to present yours without exaggerating it. And there is 4 levels. So if you're new here, I'm Suleiman. I started as an IT apprentice on $18,000 a year and moved through software, cloud engineering, architecture, DevOps. I currently have a consulting company, a software company, StudyTech.ai, and an education company, Cloud Engineering Academy. And I also have another YouTube channel, Tech with Suleiman, for 180K subscribers. So if you want, go check that out. Now, I spent 11 years in tech, including 70 years working with AWS. I've always had to prove that I could do work that I hadn't been hired yet to do. And since I've been responsible for decisions affecting real businesses. Now, the recurring mistake is that candidates use one word, experience, for several kind of different evidence, and then expect another certification to solve all of them. So let's go through what employer actually means by experience. When an employer asks for experience, they're trying to reduce uncertainty. So can you work from an incomplete requirement, choose between valid options, notice unsafe decisions, troubleshoot failure, and explain trade-offs around systems affecting real users, money, and data? A previous job answers those questions strongly because it includes teams, deadlines, legacy systems, security consequences, and ownership over time. A home project, or like a project that you do at home, tutorial project, let's say, cannot fully recreate that. And some jobs will enforce their production experience requirements. But this is not equal to professional experience, right? It does not mean that it's worthless. The real question is how many important uncertainties remain after speaking with you. And this is where candidates normally make 1 or 2 mistakes. The first is inflation. 2 AWS project or 2 years of a cloud experience. They've just built 2 AWS projects and then describes themselves as having 2 years of cloud experience. That destroys the trust the moment the interviewer asks you for a serious follow-up question. The second is erasure, right? I have no experience. They say that, even though they may have years of relevant professional judgment and cloud work that they've built, tested, and can defend. Now, one claim is very much bigger than the evidence, whilst the other makes the evidence a lot smaller than it really is. So here, where we want to be is somewhere in the middle. We don't want to say that we have no experience, but we also don't want to amplify the experience that we don't have. So somewhere in the middle, we want to be presenting ourselves. So your goal is obviously not to look more experienced than you are. It is just to stop looking less capable than your actual evidence that you've built supports. So the simplest way I've found to explain this is something that I call the cloud evidence ladder. The first level is structured or guided learning. This includes courses, certifications, step-by-step labs, tutorial projects. And to be clear, this level is very useful. An AWS certification can validate that you have learned a defined body of knowledge and passed the exam, but it does not automatically show that you can make a decision when the answer choice disappears. The second level is independent build. So here you give a problem rather than a list of instructions. You decide what to build, choose the architecture, implement it, and document why you made those choices. The third level is pressure tested and revised work. Somebody changes the requirements, something breaks, another engineer challenges your decision, you diagnose the problem, you revise the design, and explain what changed. This is where a project begins to reveal whether the understanding genuinely actually belongs to you when you've built it. The fourth level is professional operational responsibility. This is where work affects a real company, right? There are real users, there are budgets, there are deadlines, security requirements, team process, and consequences. You are accountable for what happens over time and not just whether the deployment worked once. You cannot reach that fourth level by changing the wording on your CV, but you should not spend another year filling the first level while treating professional experience as the only evidence that really counts. So certified but stalled candidates often keep adding familiar, measurable evidence. So cloud practitioner becomes a solutions architect associate, then the Terraform, then another guided project. Every step appears responsible, but if the finish line keeps moving, ask whether you need another lesson or a different kind of practice, because another certification may expand your knowledge, but it can't turn guided work into independent judgment. Now, let's make this practical. Imagine your strongest project is an AWS identity project. The README says that you created users, groups, roles, enabled MFA, wrote Terraform, and configured CloudTrail. Every one of those statements may be technically true, but the employee will still not be able to see which decision that you made, what requirement caused them, and whether the permissions actually behave as intended. So instead of going and building project number 7, take the same project and move it up a ladder. Imagine a small AWS organization with 2 non-production accounts that simulate development and production. Synthetic staff and contractor identities sign in for an IAM identity center using temporary credentials. The permission sets and account assignments are defined in Terraform, and CloudTrail is configured to capture the relevant management events from your tests. Now change one of the requirements. Let's say a contractor needs approved, time-bounded, elevated access during one simulated incident. They should be able to perform a narrow set of actions, they should not have permanent access, and the business needs evidence of what happened. You now have decisions to make. Which permission set should they use? How long should a role session last? How narrow can the access be? Which actions will you test? And what happens when the incident ends? And this is the kind of detail that only appears when you actually test the system. If you remove the contractor's account assignment, they cannot begin a new role session, but an already issued session may continue until it expires. So offboarding is not simply deleting the assignment and assuming access vanished immediately. Your design has to account for the active session as well. So that discovery is far more valuable in an interview than just saying, I use AWS Identity Center because it's best practice. Now, why is that? Well, because now the interviewer can follow a complete chain of thought and thinking, right? There was a requirement, you made a decision, you tested it, the system behaved in a way that you had not fully accounted for, then you revise your design, you tested it again. And that final description can be completely honest, right? An independent AWS sandbox project modeled workforce access across 2 non-production environments using Identity Center, Terraform. You ran the allow and deny test, you captured the CloudTrail events, and revised the contractor offboarding design after testing how assignment removal affects active role sessions. Now, that is not professional operational experience, but it is real evidence of how you think and how you solve problems. Now, AI makes this distinction even more important because AI can now generate Terraform, a polished README, an architecture diagram in seconds. So a finished repo tells employers less than it once did. Now, AI has made the output abundant, but ownership of decision-making very scarce. So can you explain the permissions, adapt when requirements change, spot an incomplete answer, and verify it through current documentation and control testing? So you want to use AI to really accelerate research and challenge assumptions, but treat its output as a hypothesis rather than actual proof. If you can't defend what it produced, the interview will expose that very quickly. So the second mistake people make is assuming that because their current title is not cloud engineer, everything that they've learned before today is completely irrelevant. That is not true either, because if your support role involved DNS incidents, you may already have learned how to isolate a networking problem under pressure. If you've administered Active Directory, you may understand identity, group memberships, and the consequence of having bad access. If you worked in project management, you may understand requirements, stakeholders, and delivery risk. So the rule is very simple. Translate the behavior and the judgment, but don't relabel the platform. So a very strong answer has three parts, even though it should sound very natural. You want to always state the honest boundaries. So I haven't held a professional cloud role yet. You want to explain the relevant judgment that you earned for real incident systems, user delivery, and then you show the cloud-specific evidence that you created to close the gap. So honest boundary, relevant judgment, cloud-specific evidence, and an answer that they can question. So that is a lot stronger than pretending that your past cloud experience or announcing that your entire career counts for nothing. So you are not starting from zero, but you are not automatically ready. Both of those things can actually be true. Now I want to talk about the part of this that most people don't want to hear. I don't have professional cloud experience may be completely accurate description of your CV, but for some of you, it stopped being a description a long time ago. It actually became an alibi. It explains why you've not applied, why nobody's reviewed your work, and why you bought another course instead of taking the instructions away. Because professional experience can only come from an employer. You have made an employer that you've never met responsible for solving your entire career problem. Now, there are two different people watching this. The first person is working hard but repeating the kind of work that never exposes whether they can actually operate independently. And the second person is not really doing much at all. You've been saying you want to move into cloud for a year, but the most of what you've actually done is some research, right? Comparing roadmaps, watching videos, finishing lessons, and then disappearing. If cloud was supposedly been your goal for the last year and you cannot point to an independent build, a serious technical review, or a period of consistent action, then you are not working on it. You are just thinking about working on it. That may sound harsh, and to be honest, it doesn't sound harsh at all, but the research that you're doing is just invisible to an employer, right? You may have felt busy, but you created nothing that you can inspect. For the outcome you say you want, that is effectively doing nothing. So basically, you've not applied, you've not done any, no one's reviewed your work, you've bought another course, and you've got a year of safe roadmaps, right? The main thing that you're missing is that your work has never been tested by anyone. And your current job makes this extremely easy to ignore because the salary keeps coming in, you know, systems and you know the people you work with. And you may also know that you don't want to be there in 5 years, but it's not painful enough today to force an actual different decision. So you tell yourself that everything is fine and fine becomes the perfect place to hide. Cloud remains something you are technically working towards without ever treating it like the career move you claim that it is. Monday comes around and then the job that you want to leave receives your best hours, your attention and your energy, and cloud receives whatever is left. So sometimes that's an hour, sometimes it is nothing. 6 months later, you say you cannot move because you don't have the experience. But where exactly was the evidence supposed to come from if none of your decisions were actually creating it? Your employer is not responsible for preparing you for your next employer. They need you useful in the role that you already perform, and they will happily let you stay there. That is not betrayal. That is an employer doing what an employer does, and your career is still your responsibility. And the other way people avoid that responsibility is by turning learning into the goal. You did not start learning AWS because you wanted to spend your life studying AWS, right? You wanted a different job. But learning is very comfortable. Nobody can reject you while you watch a course, and nobody can question your decisions while you copy a tutorial. First, you were going to apply after cloud practitioner, then it became solutions architect, then it became Terraform, then a better portfolio, then work became busy, then life became busy, and then the market looked very uncertain. Every reason sounded like a sensible one alone. Together, they describe somebody who keeps changing the conditions under which they will allow their ability to be tested. If the requirement changed every time you satisfy it, you don't have a preparation problem, you have a moving the goalpost or moving the finish line problem. And if what you've done for the last 6 to 12 months has not changed what you can build independently, explain under questioning, or show an employer, then what is the logic behind doing the same thing for another 6 months? Because changing your approach has a cost. Building without instructions may expose what you don't understand. A reviewer may pull the project apart, and applying may lead to real rejection. But doing nothing has a cost too. Another year telling people that you're working towards cloud, while the answer to it, what did you decide independently, remains exactly the same. You've been counting the cost of action because it is immediate and obvious. The cost of waiting is actually a lot quieter. It is paid in months of your life, and you normally notice it after they've already gone. Now, I'm not telling you to quit tomorrow or ignore your real responsibilities. I'm telling you to stop using stability as a waiting room. Your job should fund the transition, not become the reason you are still discussing it 2 years from now. You do not control whether an employee gives you the first cloud role, but you do control whether your week contains actions that make you a stronger candidate for it. And if you close this video and return exactly the same behavior tomorrow, then I don't have experience is no longer something that's just happening to you, right? It's just an excuse. It is a situation that you are helping to preserve. So here is what I want you to do. Do not build another project this week. Take the strongest cloud project you already have and close this tutorial, and then go through this exercise. Firstly, explain the business problem without naming a single service. If you cannot explain who the system is for, what they need, and what could go wrong, then you do not yet have have an architecture problem. Second, identify the three most important decisions that you made. For each one, explain which credible alternative that you rejected and what trade-off you accepted. The third one is changing constraint, budget, recovery, sensitive data, reduce the experience of the operational team, change the user access requirements, and then decide whether the architecture should change with it. Fourth, introduce one safe failure, break a permission, block or network path, remove a dependency, or create a deployment error. Use the logs and systems behavior to diagnose and recover it. Fifth, put the work in front of somebody qualified to challenge it, not someone who will say the diagram looks good, right? Somebody that can ask why, somebody who can change the requirement, and somebody who can identify whether your reasoning ends. So your strongest project, change your constraint, introduce failure, review gate, and label it honestly. Then revise the build and label it accurately as independent, non-production project work. Finally, compare it with one real target job. Write it down, the requirement, the evidence that you have, what can employ inspect, the honest label for that evidence, and the gap that still remains. If the job requires production on-call responsibility and you don't have that, mark it as missing, do not write around it. Then target a more appropriate role or build the strongest adjacent evidence that you honestly can. The point of this exercise is not to convince yourself that you're already experienced, right? It's to replace the vague sentence that I need more cloud experience with a precise answer about what you can prove and what is genuinely missing. Because learning more cloud is not the plan. I cannot yet defend my network design when the security requirement changes is actually a plan. Now you know exactly what to work on. So let's just go back to the two candidates from the beginning. 6 months from now, candidate one may have another certification, 3 more guided projects, a longer list of AWS services. They have been very busy. But when an interviewer asks them about their experience, the answer is still, I don't have any. I'm hoping somebody gives me a chance. Candidate two may not have a professional cloud title either, but they removed the instructions from the strongest project, changed the requirement, introduced a failure, corrected it, and let somebody else challenge the decisions. Candidate one has got another certification, like I said. Candidate two can show you the build and explain every decision. The missing title is actually the same, but what the employer is being asked to trust is again completely different. And this decision that is in front of you right now, you can leave this video, watch another 5 hours of cloud content and feel as though that you've worked on your career, or you can take one thing you already built and exposed it to the kind of pressure that shows whether the ability is actually yours. Because insight without change in behavior is just another form of consumption. So the next time that you say, but I don't have cloud experience, be very, very precise. If nobody's trusted you with a professional responsibility for a real cloud environment yet, then say that. If what you really mean is that you have spent in the last year postponing the moment your work gets tested, then stop blaming the missing title for a decision that you continue to make. You cannot control which company says yes, but you can control the candidate they're being asked to say yes to. So don't spend another 6 months making the same objection stronger. Build the evidence, put it under pressure, find out what's missing, and then correct it. Then do it again. Now, professional cloud experience is what you're trying to earn. Taking responsibility for the evidence begins before anybody actually gives you the title. So as always, I'm rooting for you. Go and become undeniable.